Hello, you're listening to the London Review of Books podcast. I'm Thomas Jones, and today, for this special episode, I'm absolutely delighted to be joined by Emily Wilson, translator of the Odyssey and the Iliad, and long-standing contributor to the LRB. We've asked you back on the podcast, for a couple of reasons. First, of course, Christopher Nolan's movie version of the Odyssey has just been released, and you've written about it for the LRB. So we're going to talk a bit about the film, but also you and I have co-hosted two series about Greek and Roman literature for the LRB's Close Readings podcast, including an episode on the Odyssey, which we've made free for everyone to listen to, and you can find a link for that below. So we're going to talk as well as about Nolan's Odyssey, about Homer's Odyssey, and in particular, because it's the summer, the idea of travel in the Odyssey. But let's start with Nolan's film. So, Christopher Nolan's Odyssey, it is very much Christopher Nolan's Odyssey, not Homer's Odyssey or anyone else's Odyssey, isn't it?
It's very much a summation of many, many Nolan-y tropes and Nolan-y themes. It's like Dunkirk, it's all about near drowning and a survival that's actually a triumph. Like Oppenheimer, it's a technocrat hero. Like pretty much all of his movies, it's a man on a quest to recover or avenge a lost woman. One can sort of do a very long list of all the Nolan tropes that come up in this film. So if you like Nolan, I would definitely recommend it.
But many of those things are also in the Odyssey. You can see
exactly,
why he was drawn to
it. You can absolutely see why he's always been remaking the Odyssey, even when I think he didn't realize he was always remaking the Odyssey until fairly recently, but he certainly was. And these themes of time and memory have always been central to him, but also, of course, they're the Odyssey.
Yeah. I've been thinking about that. The number of stories which could be thought to be versions of the Odyssey. In a way, even the first Rambo movie, First Blood, warrior comes home, brings the war.
Yes. When you can't do a warrior story, that's not in a sense an Odyssey story. Yes.
Yeah. But more than Rambo, there is Nolan's Odyssey is a more literal, or on the face of it, a more literal version of the Odyssey that the hero's called Odysseus. It's set in a version of the Bronze Age Mediterranean, although is it a version of the Bronze Age Mediterranean, or is it a version of Hollywood? Is it set in Hollywood?
It's both, right? It's certainly set in Hollywood, but it's dressed up to be this mishmash of different time periods, which in some ways, there was so much discourse about, is this historically authentic? Which I think is ridiculous, because of course the original poem is not historically authentic. It's a poem, it's about myth, it's about drawing on many centuries of pre-existing poetic and storytelling tradition to put something together that's a kind of historical amalgam. So I think the idea that it has to be authentic is ridiculous. I was actually quite surprised by how much of the incidents in the Odyssey Nolan manages to pack in. We get so many of the most famous elements of the poem. Not just the basic outlines of the narrative of warrior comes back to his wife who's been waiting for 20 years and his son who's almost a man, and the heartbreaking scene with the dog. But we also get all of these cinematic and dramatic, spectacular incidents along the way with the backstory of his travels. And we also get a lot of extra stuff that isn't in the Odyssey, such as the fall of Troy, Sinon, who is mysteriously called Sinon in this film. I sort of get into theories about why might that be in the piece. But in any case, it's the Odyssey plus rather than the Odyssey minus. Though in some ways, there are things that the Odyssey does very well that are not things that Nolan specializes in, such as dialogue and characterization, for instance. Yes,
and also in terms of episodes, some of them get mashed together. That the Lotus Eaters are sort of combined with Calypso. That Calypso, played by Charlize Theron, feeds Matt Damon's Odysseus the Lotus. So that you manage to get two episodes in one. And Nausicaa is missing entirely, which my daughter was very unimpressed by.
Yes, right. There's a lot, but of course that would not have been something that would have appealed to him creatively. He's not interested in the mundane. He's not interested in female characters who have their own thoughts. He's interested in these very grandiose spectacles. I think everyone has the right to remake the Odyssey in their own image, and Nolan has certainly done that.
The gods as well. When we say, there are no.
Oh yes, the gods. There are no gods, even though the Zendaya sort of is Athena, but it's also not entirely clear, is she really Athena or is she a figment of Matt Damon's imagination or his bad conscience about the sack of Troy? She pops up but appears only to him. She never appears to Tom Holland being Telemachus. Instead, we have another person who's mentor, who is a guy with a beard and doesn't seem to be Athena in any way. So there's a sort of absence of the gods, and yet the gods are constantly mentioned. For instance, there's a fixation on the law of Zeus, which is a version of the ancient Greek idea of xenia.
And that's the idea of it's mutual hospitality, that if a stranger turns up at your house, you welcome them and you give them bed and dinner, and then when you go to their house, you'll get a bed and dinner. And this is a way that relationships are built up at a distance, and as a way of creating a kind of shared culture across archipelagos of islands and beyond.
Yes, and in the world of the movie, that wonderful ethical value is under threat, and hence the end of the Bronze Age looms and the collapse of civilization, which the characters keep saying, our civilization is collapsing. Oh no!
Yeah, which is a very contemporary fear with reason.
Very contemporary fear.
But,
yes.
and also, yes. I mean, there is this also. We have these warriors from the West, the Greek. I mean, even using the word Greeks is anachronistic, right? Even in terms of the poems and everything else. But the Argives or the Achaeans or Danaans or the Mycenaeans or the whatever we would call them, they're from the West, and they go and fight this war in the East, and they commit terrible atrocities, and then they come home, and clearly that has many resonances with contemporary America, whether in terms of Vietnam or Iraq or even what's happening in Iran now. That there's this completely gratuitous war of people. We head to the east with our latest technology, whether that's a wooden horse or enormous bombs, and we destroy ancient civilizations, and the whole world, including ourselves, is worse for it. So I mean, in a sense, it seems that a movie trying to address some of this is, at least someone's trying. At least someone's making the
Someone's
effort.
trying to say something about that, and I think I took out of the piece a whole long meditation on what is he doing with the Bush administration and the weapons of mass destruction. But it's very clear that the part of the reason he's interested in the Sinon or Sinon episode is that it's a way of meditating on what happens if a war is based on a lie, and what does it mean to have made war in the East based on this deception of the American voting public. And then we've been living with the legacy of the war on terror ever since, and that's the crumbling of Bronze Age / American civilization.
Yeah. And also, I mean, you mentioned the similarities to Oppenheimer, and in a way that Odysseus is very like Oppenheimer in that he creates this deadly weapon in the form of the Trojan Horse, which is able to get the Greeks through the gates of Troy, and then is racked by guilt for what he's done afterwards. But again, the focus is very much on, the clever guy who built the bomb. And in the way we don't,
yes.
there are no Japanese characters in Oppenheimer and the Trojans.
Yes, and similarly, there were no Trojan characters in the Odyssey. And similarly, there were no German characters in Dunkirk. I mean, it's very much the war story told from the perspective of the agonized warriors, as opposed to showing us anything of the other side.
Yeah. And whereas in the Iliad, I mean, it's very much the agonized warriors, but it is the agonized warriors on both sides, and their wives and their families.
Exactly. On all sides, because we get the gods as well. So we get multiple different perspectives on the war in a way that Nolan seems to give us only one perspective. And
there are many other ways of making film adaptations of the Odyssey, and besides Rambo, which I keep coming back to. But last year there was it called The Return, starring Ralph Fiennes, which was...
The Return, I think it was 2024, yes, which had Ralph Fiennes as Odysseus and Juliette Binoche as Penelope. And it was similar to the Nolan movie in that it had no gods, but it was totally dissimilar in every other way. It was a very small budget film which has none of the spectacle and special effects and strips out not just Nausicaa, but the whole of the travelling. And it's just... here is Odysseus naked, washing up on the beach, and what's going to happen, and how can he possibly manage to, despite having nothing, massacre the suitors who've been besieging his wife. And she also seems to have nothing in that film. I mean, it's totally stark, and everything is stripped away. I mean, clearly a very different approach from Nolan. But I mean, do you find
And I suppose looking at them both on their own terms, would you consider The Return a more successful movie on its own terms?
I think it's a more coherent movie. I think the fact that it really makes some difficult choices about what to cut out, and it cuts out most of it. I think it hangs together in a way that the Nolan film doesn't. The Nolan film is trying to pack everything in, and it also packs in, I think, too many different ideas which contradict each other, as well as too many different episodes which it sort of loses track of its own narrative and its own spectacle. Whereas The Return, whatever we think about what it's doing and saying, it is doing and saying something powerful and coherent. So I think it's worth seeing both of them and seeing them ideally back to back.
Yeah, I mean, and one of the messages of the Nolan film is we are the barbarians at our own gates.
Mm-hmm.
But
that's a spoiler, a little bit, but okay.
Well, a little bit, but I mean, if you don't spot that, I mean, honestly, if you don't sort of realise that 20 minutes in,
totally.
I think you're not paying attention.
Yes,
but in the most abstract way, you can say we are the barbarians at our own gates. But the problem is it's almost as if there are no other gates. We are the barbarians. We are destroying our own civilization, but ours is the only civilization, and that seems sort of blinkered. And actually, there was, quite an interesting piece in Equator by a Sahrawi writer pointing out that some of the movie was filmed in Western Sahara, which is, it's the last occupied territory in Africa. It's the last colony in Africa,
yeah.
And in a sense, if you're making movies about conquest and colonization and the damage that does, you probably shouldn't be filming in an occupied territory. But
yes, great point. Yes,
yes. But anyway, to return to the less vexed or differently vexed matter of the poem, the poem. I was going to say itself, or the original poem, but again, it isn't. I mean, we think of it as the original, but it's not an original, is it? When the text that we have was, I'm going to get this wrong, but it was written down at some point in the Archaic period, 8th century-ish, and then...
Yes. The poem we have, the Odyssey and the Iliad, along with the poems of Hesiod, the Theogony and Waxen Days, were composed using the new technology of writing, new to the Greek-speaking world. The Greek-speaking world had been illiterate, had lacked writing for the previous 300 years or so, until the mid-8th century. So these poems, as written monumental epics, can't possibly be older than the mid-8th century. I think a good guess is that they're from the early 7th century. That kind of time, it's the Archaic period, as you say. It's not the Bronze Age. It's not even the quote-unquote Dark Ages or early Iron Age. It's the Archaic period when it's the beginnings of urbanization. It's the period of mass migration, colonization in the Greek-speaking world. It's a period of sort of gathering together and a kind of new renaissance for the Greek-speaking world long after the fall of the Mycenaeans and also after the Iron Age.
And then we know, I guess, obviously the oldest survive. We don't have a 8th century BCE manuscript of the Odyssey that we can go back to as the original text. But we know right from quotations of it from 5th century Athens and so on that the text that we have was more or less fixed then the way it was written about and referred to. And then the Library of Alexandria in the Hellenistic period, that they had copies of it, and there were editors, right, who worked on it in much the way that a modern editor would work on a text.
Exactly. Yes. So we have what's called scholia, which is records of these fascinating ancient scholarly pedants arguing about what should we read in that line, what should we read in that line. Oh, that quotation's wrong. His text is wrong. Let's get rid of that reading. It's ridiculous, and Telemachus shouldn't be saying that. All of that. There's still a lot of scholarly debate about the degree to which there were variants in the text in that period where we don't have manuscripts from the 7th century to the 3rd century. What exactly was happening? How much variation was there in the text? We know from, for instance, quotations in Plato that there were at least minor variations in what different 5th and 4th century readers were reading if they were dipping into a scroll of Homer. And presumably that also reflects the fact that the rhapsodes who were learning these poems by heart and performing them, which was how most people in those centuries were experiencing them, some of them may have done a riff with an extra line in it, or done some variant on, I think it sounds a bit better if we do this. So as with any script that's primarily used by actors for performance, there are variations that are probably based on variants that rhapsodes made up, as well as differences in how different copyists copied the scrolls.
Yeah. And before it was written down, or this version was written down by, let's call him Homer, or them Homer, it was transmitted orally that rhapsodes would sing their versions of it, and every version of it would probably have been slightly different, and so on for centuries.
So let's do a just little pin in it about terminology and it. Right, because
okay.
Right, what was it before there was writing? Before there was these written poems, it wasn't it. Right, that wasn't the Odyssey. That was many poems created and performed orally, not by rhapsodes, but by the aioidoi, the singers, who were composing as they went. They weren't learning a script by heart in the way that a rhapsode was doing, but they were making it up as they went along and riffing on these traditional stories about Troy, about Odysseus and Achilles and the gods and the days of heroes that are long gone, but we still remember them and keep making up, but also retelling stories about them. So the Odyssey and the Iliad are responding to and reinventing that long, multi-generational tradition of oral storytelling.
And so that making bits up, adding bits, merging bits together that Christopher Nolan does in his movie, there is a long and venerable tradition of that.
Yes,
that
exactly,
and,
yes.
Yeah.
Mixing and matching. And of course, whoever composed the Odyssey, let's call them Homer, was doing that already, that they were doing something extraordinary with this pre-existing oral tradition and making it, in a way, as Nolan does, making it grander and bigger than you've ever seen it before, by using this new technology, not of the IMAX camera, but of writing.
And when we use the word Odyssey in sort of colloquial speech, talk about an Odyssey, we mean a long and difficult and arduous journey. But one of the interesting things about the poem, and certainly when you first encounter it or whenever you do, I did as a teenager reading it, the small amount of space actually given over to Odysseus's adventures, I was slightly nonplussed by. I was expecting, the adventure story, and we don't get, you don't even get to the Cyclops till book 9. What is this? It's interesting that we think of it as a book about travel in some ways, but one of the interesting things about it is how much lack of movement there is in it. That Odysseus takes 10 years to get home from Troy, and 7 years of that he's on Calypso's island, a year of that he's on Circe's island. He's not actually traveling, he's not moving. And meanwhile, back on Ithaca, Penelope is also in stasis, not marrying again. There's political stasis in the island, as Telemachus is too young to be king and no one else can take over. There's this sort of eternal feast where the suitors sitting there eating, and how can there be any sheep left on the island for them to eat somehow after all this time? And even more so with Penelope's famous unweaving of her father-in-law's shroud. That is what she's, or the tapestry that she's making, Laertes' shroud.
Yes.
And she makes it and then she unmakes it. So this amazing image of time being stuck. So is the Odyssey a book more about stasis than it is about movement?
I think it's about stasis, and it's about this refusal to go forward in time, and this attempt to go back in time and to go back in space, and that the whole goal of the travels in the narrative of the poem is for Odysseus to get back where he started. To achieve something parallel to Penelope's weaving, of just unweave the whole thing, remake the story so that you're right back at the beginning again. Spoiler alert, it ends actually with Odysseus back at where he started, which is being a warrior again, but also being back where he started in his home place. And I think your experience is totally parallels many other people's experiences. There's been kind of misadvertising and pop culture ideas about what the Odyssey is, where we sort of think the bits that are actually about 1/6 of the poem, where Odysseus is telling his tall tale adventure story to the Phaeacians, that's a very small minority of the poem. We have first 2 books about Telemachus being stuck, and then we have Telemachus's kind of nothingy travels to these local places to talk to his dad's old war buddies. And then the whole of the second half is Odysseus back home, not going anywhere, but just trying to reestablish being home. So I think, obviously, many of us have the experience of you go on holiday and you see your home place differently when you get back. And the Odyssey is more about that than it is really about the adventures and other places are so fascinating. It has some elements of that, but it's not primarily about that.
Or maybe you can't have a poem about movement without there also being stasis, that movement and lack of movement have a sort of dialectical relationship. That
Yes, you don't know what it is to be stuck unless you're trying to move, and vice versa. Yeah.
And of course, I mean, as you said, going back to Nolan's movie, that in the poem, which poem? In Homer's Odyssey, let's call it that, in Homer's Odyssey, it's quite important, right, that Odysseus is the one telling the story of his travels. And they're the kind of all adventurers' tall tales. Oh, you won't believe the journey I've had. And these kind of, there were giants, and there was this, that, and the other. And there were these, sexy women who I met on the beach. And all of these sorts of tales that a man regaling his banqueting companions with. And, I mean, there is the question, in a sense, of course they're not true because it's all made up and one-eyed giants don't exist. But even within the world of the poem, the question of whether or not Odysseus is telling the whole truth about his adventures and his own role in them, and maybe he's not quite as heroic as he makes out, is present in the text, isn't it?
Absolutely, yes. I mean, people have discussed the fact that these various exciting goddesses are very prominent in the tall tales of his wanderings, and we know that he's telling all of this to the royal family on Phaeacia, where Arete seems to be very interested in learning more about the cool goddesses. So maybe he's also shaping the narrative to suit his audience. And we also know that the Phaeacians love storytelling. He's already proven that he can perform as an athlete in the games on Scheria, and with those tall tales of his wanderings, he's proving to the Phaeacians, look, I'm also a master storyteller, and look how interesting everything I've done is. But it's not just that everything I've done is interesting, it's also that he's telling it in a fascinating way, which is very different from the way that it's sort of set up in the Nolan movie, where he's not performing as a storyteller, he's just trying to recover from amnesia.
Yeah, and as you say, his audience there is Calypso rather than the Phaeacians, and as you say, she seems more like a therapist, that he's recovering traumatic memories.
Yes, and she's gradually winning him off the drugs and helping him to to figure out what he's done. Yes, but whereas in the Odyssey, he knows exactly what he's done, and he also knows how to spin it into different tales depending on the audience. And of course, the stories he tells to the Phaeacians are only they're some of the most memorable autobiographical stories he tells in the Odyssey, but he also tells a whole lot of other autobiographical stories, mostly about how once upon a time he came from Crete, where, as we know, everyone is a liar.
So in a sense, this idea of retelling stories, that the Odyssey has been retold in so many ways, so many different times. I mean, you in your piece you list some of them, what you call the more memorable creative responses to the Odyssey: Euripides' Helen, Virgil's Aeneid, Paradise Lost, Joyce's Ulysses, Walcott's Omeros, Outward's Penelopiad, Madeline Miller's Circe, Lisa Peterson's play. There are endless retellings of this story.
There are so many.
So, yeah.
Yes.
But even already within Homer's poem, Odysseus is aware that he is retelling old tales.
Absolutely. Yes. And he's aware that his own tale sort of instantly becomes old as soon as it's out of his mouth, and he doesn't want to repeat himself because he doesn't want to be boring. So there's a sort of self-consciousness about storytelling which is already there in the poem itself. Should I read a little bit?
Yes, okay.
So I'm going to read just after the killing and eating of the cattle of the sun, which is the end of book 12 of the poem. So Odysseus has gone off to pray and ended up taking an ill-advised nap while his men have decided to be heroic and eat the hero's food, which is the cattle of the sun. Big mistake. Back on shore beside my ship, I scolded each of them. It did no good. The cows were dead already. The gods sent signs. The hides began to twitch. The meat on skewers started mooing, raw and cooked. There was the sound of cattle lowing. For 6 days my men banqueted on beef from Helios. When Zeus, the son of Cronos, led in the 7th day, the wind became less stormy, and we quickly went on board. We set the mast up and unfurled the sails and set out on the open sea. When we had left that island, we could see no other, only the sky and sea. Zeus made a mass of dark blue storm cloud hang above our ship. The sea grew dark beneath it. For a moment the ship moved on, but then came Zephyr, shrieking, noisily rushing, with torrential tempest. A mighty gust of wind broke off both forestays. The tacking was all scattered in the hold. The mast was broken backwards, and it struck the pilot in the stern. It smashed his skull. His bones were crushed, his skeleton was smashed. He fell down like a diver from the deck. His spirit left his body. At that instant, Zeus thundered and hurled bolts to strike the ship. Shaken, it filled with sulphur. All the men fell overboard, and they were swept away, like seagulls on the waves beside the ship. The gods prevented them from reaching home. I paced on board until the current ripped the ship's side from the keel. The waves bore off the husk and snapped the mast. But thrown across it there was a backstay cable, oxide leather. With this I lashed the keel and mast together, and rode them, carried on by fearsome winds. At last the tempest ceased. The west wind lulled. I worried that the south wind might compel me to backtrack to the terrible Charybdis. All night I was swept backward, and at sunrise I came back to the dreadful rocks of Scylla and of Charybdis, gulping salty water and overshadowed by the fig tree's branches. I jumped and clutched its trunk, bat-like, unable to plant my feet or climb. The roots were down too low, the tall, long branches were too high. So I kept clinging on. I hoped Charybdis would belch my mast and keel back up. She did! As one who spends the whole day judging quarrels between young men, at last goes home to eat. At that same hour, the planks came bobbing up out of Charybdis. I let go my hands and feet and dropped myself way down to splash into the sea below, beside the timbers of floating wood. I clambered onto them and used my hands to row myself away, and Zeus ensured that Scylla did not see me, or else I could not have survived. I drifted for 9 days. On the evening of the 10th, the gods helped me to reach the island of the dreadful, beautiful, divine Calypso. She loved and cared for me. Why should I tell the story that I told you and your wife yesterday in your house? It is annoying, repeating tales that have been told before.
Yeah, so good. And I mean, in a way, that's the whole journey in miniature in some ways, isn't it?
Exactly, yes.
That Odysseus's men make the terrible mistake that he's told them not to do, and then when he's not looking, they do it anyway. All their fault, not his fault. And that, amazing bit that the cows, sort of the meat coming back to life on the skewers.
Love that, yes.
Moment of horror. And then
so creepy, yes.
Yeah. And then back to Scylla and Charybdis. So we've had that, but here they are again, and a bit of his MacGyverish description of how he lashes quick thinking, the oxide leather lashing together.
He's always Polymechnos as well as Polymertis, right? He's always got the technical abilities as well as the quick thinking.
Yeah. And he's drifted for 9 days, and then on the 10th, so it's not 10 years, it's 10 days. But again, it's this sort of repetition, and almost like the whirlpool, this sort of vortex that's spiraling round and round and round. And
yes. So going back to your point that it's about images of time and unraveling, but coming back again, and these numbers that sort of represent time in different ways. The cattle are the number of the days of the year, but then we have these multiples of 10 as well. Yeah, I mean, I hope that everyone's holidays are easier than this, but also that you can get out of it with your quick thinking, and that even if it seems as if you're back where you started, actually it's different this time. That he's got things to hang on to, and a different way out. I think it's also really interesting in this passage that in the previous trip through Scylla and Charybdis, it's all following exactly repeated what has Circe said is going to happen, exactly what Circe says will happen. Don't go too near Charybdis because you're going to lose the whole ship. You've got to lose the 6 men and therefore go past Scylla. But in this repeat, Odysseus sort of proves that actually, even when it seems as if there's only 2 options, maybe there's another option. We saw that fig tree before. Now we're going to use the fig tree in a different way. So I think it's also about the poet's virtuosity in sort of suggesting both that there are only 2 narrative paths. Surprise! There's a 3rd narrative path, and that's the one we're going with. So there's both this meta poetic thing of I know you're going to be bored if I just repeat myself, but actually I'm not repeating myself.
Yeah, or I appear to be repeating myself, and actually we do all like tales that have been told before. We do
Love it, yes.
love hearing the same old stories. So it's
There's a comfort in that as well, yes. And there's also, I mean, Charybdis is great. We want it again. We already had it, but it was really good. Do it again. Yeah. Yes.
I'd say one moment in the film where Matt Damon's Odysseus, in the Nolan film, where Matt Damon's Odysseus does seem to, be a bit crafty and clever and tell a lie to get his way, is the bit when he says to the crew as they're approaching Scylla and Charybdis, no, we're going to go through the whirlpool. We're going to, it's going to be like that moment in Speed where they jump the bus over the bridge, and we're going to, if we take it fast enough, it'll throw us out the other side. And, Eurylochus says, absolutely not, that's bad. We're going through that channel where they don't know Scylla is, but Odysseus does know.
Yes.
And he tells them to do the thing he doesn't. It's a bit like talking to a 2-year-old in some ways, that you say to,
yes.
You say to
that will make him think it's his own idea.
Yeah, whatever you do, don't go to bed.
Yes, exactly.
Then they think it's their idea, and they go, and so they do. But then they realise that he did. So there are moments in the film where...
Yes, no, that's a good point. Yes. I mean, as you know, I wanted Matt Damon to be much smarter than he is in this film, but you're right. There's the occasional moment when he seems to have a glimmer of an idea.
So you translated a Homer's poem, 2017, nearly 10 years ago now.
Yes. So I've just been drifting for 9 years, and then on the 10th, I'm going to retranslate it. Yes.
Yes. But I mean, why? If that's...
because I mean, I'm proud of my 2017 one, but I also, when I was, at multiple points while doing it, I felt frustrated with the line for line constraint, which I did because I think there's always this temptation which many, many translators in general, but also specifically for Homer, fall into, which is make it twice as long as the original. And in fact, the pacing, the quickness, the sense of, I really want more of this because you haven't bored me, is so much part of the experience. So I didn't want to do that, and therefore I confined myself to the same number of lines as the original to convey the rapidity of Homer. And I liked things about that, but I also felt it forced me into using more short words than I otherwise would have done, just because otherwise the syllable count wouldn't work. So I can't ever have Polymekanos Odysseus be something as long as Polymekanos. He's always got to be crafty or wily, because then I make the line count work. Whereas with my Iliad translation, I let myself have a few more lines than the original, and I ended up thinking, ooh, it's actually so great to have just a few more syllables to play around with. So the new translation of the Odyssey, which I'm a bit over halfway through doing, is going to be still iambic pentameter. A lot of choices and priorities in a way are the same. I still want to try to convey the musicality, metricality, alliteration, cool characterizations and different voices. All of those things are the same, but just having a few more syllables changes everything. And so I'm going to quadruple the notes as well, but I'm also going to increase the line count, and that means it's a complete retranslation, retranslation from scratch.
And more epithets, because didn't you have to leave
more epithets too? Yes, exactly. So I felt that with the line for line constraint, that it was kind of valid, and I still think it's both ways are valid. If he's Dios Odysseus, he's always Dios Odysseus. It kind of just means capital O Odysseus. It's okay sometimes to leave out that he's the special guy Odysseus. But if I have enough syllables, I'm going to max out on the epithets. So I feel like I haven't talked to my publishers about how to sell people on this, but it seems I have like the worst marketing line in the world, which is that this one is going to be significantly longer and much more repetitious. If you felt that it was too fresh and interesting, then just wait.
Now twice as long.
Now twice as long. You like that? More of it. Yes.
I was by chance rereading a piece by Edward Lookback about the Iliad, and he was very fierce about this translation by Stephen Mitchell, I think.
Yes.
Yeah.
He doesn't.
For all the bits that are missed out.
There's many reasons to be fierce with him. Yes. Well, there's a lot of reasons to be fierce. He's one of those like jazz up a pre-existing translation kind of translators, and he also made the mistake of reading Martin West. And, Martin West was a very eminent Greek scholar, but his ideas about the Homeric question were really kooky. And he, unlike almost every modern Homerist, West rather than Mitchell, West believed that the Homeric poems were patched together, they weren't composed based on a pre-existing oral tradition, but rather that they were patched together from pre-existing bits of written text, more like the Book of Genesis. So according to West's theories, Book 10 of the Iliad doesn't really belong in the quote-unquote original poem, because look how weird it is and how different it is from the rest of the poem. So Mitchell's translation leaves out Book 10, very debatably, in my opinion.
Which also
and
has...
also it's such a shame, because it's a good book.
And that's the bit where Odysseus and Diomedes go on their night raid, and they steal
the night raid, yes.
And Odysseus has his mysterious boar's head helmet, or not mysterious because they existed, has his boar's head helmet, and also they ride horses. And isn't it like the only bit where people actually ride horses rather than
exactly.
riding in chariots?
So it's an anachronism. It doesn't fit with the warfare methods of the rest of the poem. But then it's marks itself out as different in every possible way. Other fighting always happens during the day, not during the night. It's a drawing on the lokos tradition, the ambush tradition within Greek epic storytelling, rather than the open warfare, Cleia Androne, famous deeds of men tradition. So it generically marks itself out as different. Does that mean it came from a different written text? No, that doesn't follow whatsoever.
Yeah, and this is in Lookback's review of Stephen Mitchell's translation, he also says that the war chariots he compares to mere golf carts, because they kind of ride up to the battlefield and then jump out and do their fighting on foot.
I like that. Yes,
which
exactly.
Is very,
it's very funny. Yes,
very funny. But I suppose that question of kit. And the question of Odysseus's bow, which is very important. And as you say in your piece, that the twanging of the bow, it makes this very wonderful sound when you listen to it in Dolby 7.1 surround or wherever it is that they use in Nolan's movie. But that's in the poem as well, isn't it? It's very important.
Yes,
the sound of Odysseus's bow and
Yes, going back to what we were saying before about Odysseus as a storyteller, as a poet, the poem is very much interested in what does it mean to be a warrior poet, and how are those two roles related to each other. And we sort of get to see that in action in the transition from the end of book 21, the beginning of book 22, where the whole stringing of the bow is compared to a poet as he's examining the bow it's like a lyre. He strings it, and it's as if he's a lyre player. And the movie sort of picks up on that, but doesn't then pick up on the further musical/poetic image, which is that again, we're going to spoil, but that's okay. When he does manage to string the bow and starts shooting it, not just through the axes, but then through the suitors, the first arrow goes through the neck of Antinous, and the blood spurts out in a double gush, it's implicitly it's an aulos, it's a double pipe, and so he's playing not just on the lyre of the bow, but also with this whole symphony of the pipe music of the blood gushing out.
which is kind of horrible, as well as very brilliant. I suppose one of the arguments you could make about the Nolan movie is that we have a sense that Odysseus, he goes off to war, and he again has been lied to by Agamemnon. He lies to Sinon or Sinon about the horse and about them leaving and about what the horse is, but he has also in a sense been lied to by Agamemnon, and he has lied to himself, and it's as if they're stuck on this fucking beach, as he calls it, and so he wants we want this war to be over. Here's the bomb, the horse that we're going to build out of a boat, and this is our way in. It'll end the war, and that's what we need. But then they're in the city, and he sees that what ending the war means is killing, maiming, presumably raping, although that's not that clear, but of the people who have been inside the city. And he has this moment of, like Oppenheimer, he builds the bomb and then only belatedly realizes what it's done, and so he feels So he's not going to be clever anymore, and he's not going to be funny anymore. That the kind of the Odysseus we know from Homer is an Odysseus that we don't see in the movie because he has had this realization about the horrors and the sorrow of war. But what doesn't quite work about that is then he goes home and, kills all the people in his house. So
slaughters everyone. So still seems to be actually very good at killing people and doesn't seem to feel bad about it, mysteriously enough. Even though you'd think if he's going to be a consistent character, surely he would still be in that Oppenheimer agonized mode. And yet he's not.
Yeah. And another thing that the film dodges, and I know that there have been many other modern retellings of the story which have focused on this, is what happens to the enslaved women in Odysseus's palace.
Not just the enslaved women, but also the Melanthius, the enslaved man, right? I mean, that the culmination of Book 22 of the Odyssey is that Odysseus delegates the final set of killings to Telemachus. And I was sort of wondering, did Tom Holland's agent say, no, we can't have him doing that? But so he delegates the final set of killings of the enslaved people who've been most intimately serving the appetites of the suitors, which is the 12 women that they've had sex with and the one man who's been both most assiduous in bringing them this endless supply of animals to eat, Melanthius the cowherd. And all of those people get killed by Telemachus. He uses a sailor's rope, so he's sort of echoing his father's journey in stringing this sailor's rope around the necks of the 12 women, so that, as the narrator says, they might die most pitifully, oiktista. So there's this invitation to understand both that this is a necessary component of the Nostos. It's part of the reclamation of Kleos, of glory for Odysseus and Telemachus, that there should be no one left in the house who remembers the suitors in the way that these people remember the suitors. And so there's this wiping out of memory, a creation of amnesia through killing, but that also we're invited to see this is pitiful from their perspective. They didn't actually want to be killed. They wanted to have a homecoming. And then after killing those 12 women, Telemachus and his henchmen chop off, in fact, in some ways even more gruesome, they chop off the hands and feet of Melanthius, who's the helpmate, and so his hands and his feet are the limbs of the suitors, and they have to get chopped off.
Right, so an adaptation of the Odyssey that dodges that. I mean, it's it's ducking the difficult questions, isn't it, really?
It's ducking the difficult questions, and I think it's also ducking... I mean, I liked what you said at the start about how the Odyssey is about stasis, but then the fact that we sort of end this killing sequence with this violent image of what does it mean to hold something in place. It's either through you tie the rope so tight around the neck that this woman's feet are never going to move again. She's never going to be having sex with the wrong man ever again. This is how we stop time, how we stop movement, or else we cut off his hands and feet. That stops time or movement very effectively. And now we're absolutely immobilized in this moment in time. Odysseus is in control, Telemachus is in control. But it's facing up to the possibility that goal of stopping time at the moment when Odysseus has power and glory, that's violent and it has a cost for some people. And the movie doesn't show us that at all.
Yeah. And perhaps from an anachronistic perspective, but reading the poem now, you think it has a cost, even if they don't think it does, or if Homer wouldn't have thought it did, or if early readers or listeners of the poem wouldn't have thought it did. It from our point of view, it has a cost for Odysseus and Telemachus as well. That Odysseus, he's taken part in this horrendous war. He has been traumatized, as war veterans are, and he comes home and he inflicts that trauma on his family, including on his son. He makes Telemachus into a war criminal. Even though he's left behind, he doesn't go to fight the war. Odysseus comes home and compels
Telemachus him how
to
do
war
that.
crimes. Yeah. I mean, you can have a very moral version of the Odyssey in which Odysseus is not a moral man, right?
Yeah, absolutely, yes. Trying to make it, yes, that is an ethical issue. If you try to make the war criminal into the hero, then you're going to have some challenges. And we didn't talk about Heracles as a sort of counterpart to Odysseus in the tradition, but one could have a whole other conversation about that and about how Euripides' play Heracles Furens, which is another returning war hero narrative in dramatic form, in a way hints at that a version of that reading of the end of the Odyssey, of what if the war hero comes back and doesn't just enable his family to help him with the killing, but kill his family. Then what? How are we even using this bow? And how might the the one who's good at killing other people be outside the house, be good at killing people and causing bloodshed inside the house. Not necessarily a good thing from the perspective of that play or the people who end up being dead. So I guess I wanted to mention that just because I think people sometimes think that kind of anxiety about war heroes come back and do killing inside the house, that must be just a modern perspective. I don't think it's just a modern perspective.
I mean, it does address very briefly Agamemnon's own, different kind of homecoming, and he comes home and being murdered, which again is in Homer. But I mean, what did you think about the presentation of Agamemnon in Nolan's movie?
I mean, he's always, even when getting axed to death in the bath, seems to be wearing this ridiculous helmet. And it's like, why do you never take your helmet off? And everyone else, including when you think it would be very useful to be wearing a helmet, seems to have it off when people want to, show how human they are and let's look at their great Hollywood hair. It was, I think it was interesting, the choice to make him into such a robot Darth Vader kind of bad guy, and that there's no sense, as there is in the Odyssey poem by Homer, that he's a parallel character to Odysseus. But in a way, I think Nolan is trying to show us, I mean, as you were saying before, this is an Odysseus who's moved beyond his war, or is trying to move beyond his war hero, war criminal persona. The contrast between what does Matt Damon look like and what does Agamemnon look like is trying to make that point visually, that he's totally different. He loves his wife and child and would never kill either of them, in contrast to this monstrous Agamemnon, who's obviously going to do that because we never get to see his face, so you can't trust him an inch.
But again, he is seems more than or less than or different than human. And again, I mean, it's sort of important that Agamemnon is a man. These crimes are committed by men, that they're not committed by.
It's very important
by
that it's done by mortals, not by robots. Exactly. Yes. I mean, there are robots in Homer, but they aren't the problem. The problem is humans, and also gods, who are also quite human in certain ways.
And a very important part of the travels in the poem and in the movie, and in many versions of it, is the journey to the land of the dead.
Yes.
And again, there's a place where
yes.
Talk about a place where time is frozen. And it almost that's what hell is. Hell is the freezing of time. That and Tantalus can't reach the grapes, and Sisyphus is endlessly pushing the rock up the cliff, and Achilles says, and interestingly, Achilles is not in the movie at all. And Achilles, in the poem, saying that I'd write, if I had my time again, I'd be a farmer and live to a ripe old age.
Well, what he says is that he'd rather be be hired by a poor, be the hireling of a poor man. But then I also think it's interesting that in some ways that episode in the Nequia, the book 11 of the Odyssey, does suggest everyone's frozen in time, and yet the dead are so hungry for stories. I mean, in fact, as always in the Odyssey, stories can change things, and Odysseus is delighted to hear news about the chaos and brutality the glory and brutality of his son, Neoptolemus, who was so brave and brutal in the massacre of Troy. And Achilles, after having been all depressed and jealous of Odysseus for still being alive in the first speech he gives in that sequence, then once Odysseus shares what a monster Neoptolemus is, Achilles, the psyche, the spirit of Achilles, strides off, and there's a whole sort of joke about how he's still got really swift feet, strides off across the fields of Asphodel, super happy because he hears about the glory of his son. So there's a way that the poem is also inviting us to keep thinking about the theme which is central in the Odyssey of how do you get glory if you're not on a battlefield anymore? And one of the obvious answers is have a son, and then you'll get it through your genos, through your lineage. And that Achilles is being taught by Odysseus that he is getting glory not just by having fought and died at Troy, but also because he was smart enough to beget a son before he died. And that actually was the more important thing than killing Hector in terms of how he's going to be remembered and memorialized. So I think it's important that it's not just that Achilles is stuck in the wall of the Iliad. Achilles is also brought into the forward-looking narrative that the Odyssey also points to.
And he has that fame and he has that glory as long as people are still telling stories about him. And as long as Odysseus is still telling stories about him. Odysseus is the great storyteller. So, keep telling the stories.
Keep
telling the stories. But, Christopher Nolan's movie, you're your translations of the Odyssey. Yeah, read the stories.
Read the stories. The stories are even better than the movies. Keep reading the stories.
Great. Thank you, Emily, very much.
Okay. Thank you so much. Yes.
As I said at the start, you can listen to the full episode that Emily and I did together on the Odyssey for our close reading series Among the Ancients. Find the links below. And if you want to listen to the full series and our second series, Among the Ancients 2, Truth and Lies, and all our other close reading series, including the 5 new ones we have running this year, then you can get 50% off a 12-month subscription if you use the code SUMMER50 at checkout using the link in the description. And over the next few weeks, we're going to revisit 5 more episodes from the Close Readings archive on the theme of travel. And next week, we'll be moving forward about 2,500 years to look at the travels of Sir John Mandeville with Irina Dumitrescu and Mary Wellesley.